My first guest is one of the most sought-after conservative commentators on the scene today. He's a radio host, editor-in-chief of the Daily Wire, and also a best-selling author. His new book is called The Right Side of History: How Reason and Moral Purpose Made the West Great. Please welcome back Ben Shapiro. Ben, good to have you back, and I'm going to get right to the heart of the book. You call this the right side of history. So let's talk about what is the right side of history.
Well, the right side of history is the side where we look at Western civilization. We say, what made this place so great? So President Obama used to use the right side of history as a phrase to sort of castigate his political opponents. So the idea was that if you didn't believe in same-sex marriage, then you were, quote unquote, on the wrong side of history. You didn't believe in his particular brand of politics, then you were on the wrong side of history. That's not the contention of this book. This book is basically about why are things so great? Why are we free? Why are we living in a democracy, in a place that values individual rights, in the most prosperous time in human history? How did we get here? How did we end up on the right side of history, where most of history was human suffering and people clubbing each other and people treating each other terribly? And the answer that I give is that Western civilization is predicated on a unique balance between Judeo-Christian values and Greek teleology, that it's the use of reason balanced with Judeo-Christian revelation that has created the West. And if you lose either one of those, if you lose Judeo-Christian values and you try to rely only on reason, you tend to recede into a secular form of rationality that can degrade into some of the worst offenses we've ever seen against human beings, as in the 20th century. And if you get rid of reason in favor of just Judeo-Christian teaching, then you can very often end up in a theocratic place. You have to balance the two, and that's what the Western civilized world, and the Christian world in particular, has done a pretty good job historically of doing.
You know, Ben, you probably spend more time on college campuses than a lot of the students whose parents are paying tuition. So I'd love to get your perspective on how many students, percentage-wise, believe in what you just said and would find themselves saying, yeah, that's what I believe.
You know, I think that, frankly, most students just haven't engaged with this sort of stuff. I think most students have a tendency to believe that what they were given is not, in fact, a heritage, but they were bequeathed all the bad problems of the past, and everything good is natural, when the truth is precisely the opposite. All of the stuff that we have that is good is unnatural, and all the bad stuff, that's the natural stuff. So a lot of students have been taught a certain level of ingratitude, that they look at the American system and they see a place that is rife with terrible problems, instead of looking at America saying, this place is pretty amazing, and yeah, we have our problems, but the story of America is taking fundamentally good, true principles and then applying them more broadly to everyone. We've struggled to do that at times, but we've been moving toward that goal, as opposed to America was founded on terrible principles and we have to tear out those principles by the root to build something better.
If you were talking to parents of a soon-to-be college student, would you encourage them to go to one of the Ivy League schools? One of the schools, maybe a big state school like Berkeley. Some of the schools, they've asked you to not show up. So what are parents needing to know about the university environment today?
Well, I think that you do have to acknowledge the threat that your kid is under ideologically when they go to a major university. The chances are they're going to be learning secular humanist worldview. They're going to be learning a very left-leaning view of government and history that doesn't see Western civilization as a great good, but generally as a purveyor of evil. All of this is very common on college campuses across the country. I don't encourage parents not to send their kids to these sorts of schools, but you got to go in with your eyes open. I mean, I went to UCLA and Harvard Law, and I went in with a particular set of values. I used the educational opportunity as a way of basically bringing up my ideas against other ideas and making my own ideas stronger. If you can do that, if you can debate the ideas and discuss the ideas and really engage, then I don't think there's anything wrong with going to a school where most people disagree, including the administrators or professors. But if you believe that your kid isn't really well versed in this sort of stuff or doesn't have an interest in this sort of stuff, then you are putting your kid, or if you are a teenager, you're putting yourself in the hands of people who don't agree with fundamental premises that support Western civilization.
Ben, it appears to me that a lot of younger people sort of go not by what the facts are, they don't even dig for them, but it's what I feel, what I think, what I believe. That seems to me a dangerous basis on which to build a worldview. How do you
It's incredibly dangerous.
Yeah, but well, how do you confront that when you're on the college campuses and when you're talking to students to move from their feelings and what their intuitions are to going to a fact-based view, as you call it, the right side of history, but just looking at history as objectively as is humanly possible?
I mean, what I have to say first and foremost is what you think is actually happiness is not happiness, right? The traditional religious view of happiness is doing your duty to God, fulfilling your purpose as a human being. Happiness is not just you feeling good about yourself at a particular time for some unearned reason. That may be a fleeting feeling of decency, or you feel good about yourself for a moment. But if you want to build lifelong happiness, you have to live in a couple of ways. First, you have to recognize that reality is reality. That's where facts come in. And second, you have to be grateful. One of the key components to being happy is being grateful for everything that you're given. And never have people been given more at any time in human history than people growing up right now in the United States of America. You've been given pretty much everything. So maybe we ought to examine the foundations of that before we seek to tear them out.
Ben, you're not known as a person who's a big Donald Trump fan in terms of the politics of Donald Trump, or maybe the personality. I think that's fair to say. But his policies seem to certainly be working, and we just got job numbers that show the lowest unemployment rate, the largest number of people employed since 1969. That's pretty significant. What is he doing right, and what is he doing wrong?
So on policy, he's been significantly more conservative than I thought he would be when he was campaigning in 2016. Obviously, the tax cuts were effective. His cuts to regulation have been effective. The general atmosphere that business is free to pursue business in the United States, that obviously has been very good for the markets. All of that is great. The second half of the equation, what he's done to the body politic, I don't blame it all on President Trump. I think that this sort of rift in the body politic pre-existed President Trump, which is why he's president, obviously. But I do think that when it comes to the role of the president to educate the American people about things that matter, I just don't think that President Trump is either qualified to do that or sees himself as qualified to do that. He's much more engaged in the hurly-burly and sort of fight of politics that exist on the top level of what it is that we see. But he's not there to sort of shift the generalized opinions of the American people, as, for example, Ronald Reagan tried to do. And that's too bad, but at the same time, I think that it's up to us to recognize that maybe political leaders aren't where you should be getting your intellectual sustenance. Maybe you should instead be looking to philosophers. Maybe you should be looking to religious people, religious leaders. People who spend their time thinking about things. Trump is more of a doer than a thinker. I think that comes across in both his policy, and I think it comes across in his attitude as well.
There are about 18 people already announced for candidacy in the Democratic primary. We expect to be maybe seeing another dozen or more. I mean, who knows how many are going to show up. What do you see on the other side of the aisle from the Republicans that gives you any hope, if any, and what gives you great pause?
I do think there's a vast gap between the base of the Democratic Party and where the mainstream used to be Democrat voter is. And I think that that's exposing itself. I think that the media are just phenomenally focused on the fringiest members of the Democratic Party right now, the people who are proposing Medicare for all, the Bernie Sanderses, the people who in Congress are supporting sort of the AOC wing. But the reality is that there is a kickback. Joe Biden's level of support inside the Democratic Party is evidence that there are a lot of people who think the Democratic Party is moving too far, too fast to the left. That's encouraging, as much as I dislike Joe Biden as a politician. So I think there is some of that. Honestly, Pete Buttigieg's kind of rise in the Democratic primary is heartening in the sense that he's one of the few people on the Democratic side of the aisle who is not trying to look down his nose at people living in the middle of the country. And again, I disagree with him on nearly everything politically, but when it's seen as a sign of sanity that he'll say he'll eat at a Chick-fil-A, I think that's probably, that at least is a good thing. But I mean, honestly, there's not a lot to hope for inside the Democratic Party. The front runner for the nomination at this point, in my opinion, is either Kamala Harris or Bernie Sanders, and neither one of those seems to be promoting values with which I agree.
I hope people will read your book. I think they'll find it enlightening and illuminating for our day. It's a book we need. Ben Shapiro's The Right Side of History, How Reason and Moral Purpose Made the West Great. It's obviously at Amazon, all the major booksellers around the country. And you'll also find Ben Shapiro's writings at dailywire.com. You can follow him on Twitter at Ben Shapiro.